On this exciting episode, we say hello to Season 5 with another idealist journalist running afoul of a group of self-absorbed, money-hungry louts. William Randolph Hearst, thou shouldst be living in 1961. It's okay though, Citizen Perry's got this case under control. It's Perry Mason, Season 5, Episode 1, The Case of the Jealous Journalist. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy. My purpose, pretty simple, provide an audio companion to every episode of television's greatest legal drama, Perry Mason. Each episode, we give you a summary of the plot. We even compare plots with the Earl Stanley Gardner novel. If the episode was an adaptation, we give you a little trivia, reveal the episode's theme, and revel in a Perry proverb. That's a pearl of wisdom from the man himself. Before we head to the water cooler, where just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can discuss the ins and outs of our fave legal cruise adventures. But first, say it with me, to the law library! Each time we visit the law library, we discuss a legal conundrum from Perry's case that helps us set future courtroom precedents. In this trip to the library, we talk about death and one particular law that helps executors adjudicate death. Name it, Executor Perry!
The applicable law is the Uniform Simultaneous Death Act, Section 296 of the Probate Code, Paul.
The Uniform Simultaneous Death Act, huh? Well, it deals with situations where two people die around the same time, making it hard to figure out who died first. It can complicate who gets property, and it helps make the process of executing someone's will easier and faster. Here are some main points of the original USDA that Perry referenced. If two or more people die within 120 hours of each other, the law treats each person as if they died before the other. It applies unless their wills say something different. And in states like California, the rule helps decide who gets the property when it's unclear who died first. In the original probate code, the law ensured that if, say, a husband and wife died in the same incident, but it was unclear who died first, each person is treated as if they had died before the other, so each person's property can be managed separately, avoiding the assumption that one inherited from the other first. Is that clear as mud for you? I hope so. Great. Let's get to the plot of this episode. The Case of the Jealous Journalist. Waves, men in a boat, Denver pile rowing. Two other men getting smacked in the face with waves. Ahead, rushing water, a capsized boat. Newspaper headlines. Give us the exposition, Budget Wally Cronkite.
The Adam York party, now 3 days overdue, must have been caught in the sudden flash floods that turned rivers into raging torrents. Little or no hope is held that any of the three men in the fishing party could have survived the rapids in the desolate North Country. Canadian authorities have organized ground search parties, while Royal Canadian and American Air Force helicopters are combing the area. We will bring you further developments as we get them.
Then roll that beautiful stock footage in the update that the men are still not found. Adam York, newspaper tycoon. Prentice York, Adam York's brother. Tilden Stewart, a.k.a. Denver Pile, the managing editor. We cut to Denver Pile, with a bandaged arm fallen out in some woebegone wilderness. The men who find him want to know where the others are, and they get one answer.
Where's Adam York? Where's his brother? Dead. They're all dead.
It's a Lyndon Childs alert, everybody. This is not a drill. In this one, his name is Joe Davies, and as we meet him, he's giving directions to his girl Friday, the obviously in love with him Miriam Coffey.
Slug it, Slay. Tell him to box it on page 1. Slums, breed, and other murder. More violence in Derrick Flats. And I'll tie that in with the lead editorial.
In walks Boyd Allison, a.k.a. Newsy Savalas. With Adam York dead, Boyd Allison says that the boiling story of annexation may have to get kiboshed. The LA Chronicle can't meet its payroll after all. People are too busy watching the news on TV, like we did at the beginning of this episode. It appears we will have a dilemma concerning the will and future of the LA Chronicle. Explain it to us, Joe.
Adam York's will is being read this afternoon. From what my uncle always told me, I believe my mother and I will inherit a large part of it, probably half.
And the other half?
Go to my aunt and her family. Mr. and Mrs. Seward Quentin and their son Ralph.
Boyd comes through with some guarantees and then spills some blather about Joe being like Adam. Blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't trust Newsy Kojak as far as I could throw him. We've got a femme fatale wolf named Carrie Warden in sheep's clothing. She's fighting off cousin Ralph Quentin with one hand and handing Joe a heartwarming story with the other. She was Prentice York's heir, after all. Perry Mason told her.
I was in Perry Mason's office this morning. I know you're going there this afternoon about Adam's will. I was there this morning to see about another will.
Prentice?
He was a strange man, my stepfather. He was always busy with the paper, busy fighting Adam's fights, and yet not so busy as to leave me everything he had.
We'll see why all this matters momentarily. As Perry reads the will, Tilden Stewart finds out he gets 10 shares. The two York sisters and their respective sons split the rest. Uh-oh, we've got a recipe for a power fight, since the heirs of Prentice York want to sell the Chronicle and Joe and his mama want to keep it. Explain it, Perry.
That doesn't solve anything. There's still a 50-50 split where control of the paper is concerned.
There's an added provision in the will that the voting rights in Tilden Stewart's 10 shares of stock be assigned to Joseph Davies, that Joseph Davies be named publisher of the newspaper.
In walks Paul to break up the party. Prentice York, it appears, survived Adam York, which means Carrie Warden's getting those deciding shares.
It's not the law I'm talking about, Perry. It's the facts. Prentice York did survive Adam. They just found Prentice York's body. Mr. Stewart here didn't find Prentice at the same time he found Adam at the shore of the river, because Prentice, even though he had a broken leg, managed to drag himself more than 2 miles away from the river. He also managed to light a fire in the heavy timber country, but he died. And he must have survived his brother by at least a day.
In the light of this information, the 18 shares of stock willed to Prentice York now become the property of his legal heir, Miss Carrie Warden.
Carrie's engaged to Joe, but who should show up at Carrie's door to make a pitch but Mr. Quentin? Sell on, man!
Joe's an impractical dreamer, just like Adam. In 1 month, that paper will be bankrupt if it isn't already.
A coin usually has two sides to it.
There's a bona fide offer of $2.5 million for the paper. 1/5 of that, your share, would be worth $1.5 million.
We start to see Carrie's dastardly ways when at an engagement party that's ostensibly to tell everyone what everyone already knows, Joe and Carrie are getting hitched. Carrie gives this surprise.
Just a moment, Aunt Grace. You're almost right. Almost. Well, this is an engagement party, but the trouble is Carrie isn't getting engaged to Joe. She's announcing her engagement to me, right now.
Well, since this seems to be a propitious moment for exploding bombs, I may as well inform you that on behalf of my wife and my son, I'm requesting a stockholders meeting tomorrow for the purpose of approving the sale of the Chronicle.
Isn't the groom-to-be going to kiss the bride-to-be?
Joe drinks his troubles away as he gets scolded by Boyd Allison. Blah, blah, blah. You're not Adam. Blah, blah, blah. Later that night, Joe breaks into Carrie's room, drunk as a skunk, stumbles his way into picking up the murder weapon, then gets caught with a dead Carrie on the ground. Eesh! Perry meets with Joe in prison, and surprise, surprise, Joe's confused.
I keep thinking about last night and trying to remember. Something keeps nagging at my memory.
then, Joe remembers he had no reason to kill Carrie. There's hope. Perry!
I remember now. It was a call. Yes, that's it. I got a call at the bar. I remember. I had no reason to kill Carrie.
Well, who called you?
She did. Carrie called me at the bar in the club. She told me it was going to be all right. She wasn't going to vote her shares with the Quintons.
Paul gets on the job, and he's ready to claim the perks of Perry willingly underwriting his mission.
Paul, I want that information.
Fast. And Paul, don't spare the expenses. If somebody has to pay for Paul Drake's expensive taste, it might as well be Perry Mason.
Perry meets with Tilden, Joe's mama, and Girl Friday Miriam, and we get some more information about that pesky annexation issue.
This unincorporated strip of county here, made up of abandoned, worked-out oil fields, old derricks still standing, is what is known as Derrick Flats. It's a dirty shantytown. In water, sanitary conditions, fire hazards, the whole area is substandard. It's an ugly, dangerous eyesore.
The Chronicle supports annexation. The election will decide whether the flats are annexed and become part of the city, and the slums condemned, and new and decent housing facilities erected.
Paul pulls in an operative because apparently Paul has given the game away. Paul, no!
Don, I know I had you on another assignment, but this is important. I go myself, but the switchboard girl at the Warden Apartments knows me by sight.
Is there a good-looking girl in Los Angeles that doesn't know you by sight?
A couple. Anyway, I sort of stood her up on a date one night after I got some information from her on a divorce case. So, you are going to have to do it for me.
Okay, so I have to do it for you.
He does so by feeding her a line about a newspaper story that would feature pinup photos of her. I don't know how that worked, but we're never told how Bonnie Mae feels about playing Patsy to not one but two PIs in Perry Mason's employ.
Bonnie Mae, you're a dream. All right. Big smile.
Joe meets with Miriam behind bars. They work out their personal attraction to each other. Joe, you blind dope!
You know, there's a match that wasn't made in heaven.
Are any of them Miriam?
I think so, Joe.
Miriam.
I better be going now, Joe. Good luck.
Meanwhile, the Adam York sibling squabble begins in earnest as Perry convenes the LA Chronicle stockholders. Boyd Allison is on whose team?
In the event of default, how Mr. Allison votes is, of course, his own business.
Well, then, we obviously have no problem. The loan will never be repaid.
In 60 days, the answer will be no.
But now, see here, Mr. Allison,
Save your breath. I said no.
Before Perry can get his client off, Hamilton turns the screws a little tighter, thanks to this tidbit.
Joe Davies got 2 phone calls at the Fairmount bar the night of the murder. One from Carrie Warden, and one...
And one from me. The girl told me she'd call Davies and that she was ready to sign my contract. So I called Davies.
Why?
I intended to own the paper and run it myself. I told him that. Once Carrie Warden signed that contract, he was out. Once and for all out, and for good.
We're in court now, and Hamilton calls the neighbor who found Joe with the body, Tilden Stewart, Ralph Quentin, Mrs. Quentin, and the bartender who, it turns out, followed Joe to Carrie Warden's apartment. During a recess, Perry sends Paul out on some errands to solve the case. Back in court, Perry interrogates the bartender some more, and does so with aplomb.
Now, Mr. Young, in your own personal experience, if you were to call a number and telephone had been similarly disconnected, what would happen?
I'd get a busy signal.
Didn't this explanation occur to you at the time? That when you called, the telephone might have been disconnected in a struggle, let us say, hours before, and yet you still would have gotten
a busy signal? No, it didn't occur to me at that time. But it does now.
Next up, Boyd Allison. And it's on Cross where things get really interesting. Expose him, Perry!
From the beginning, you were opposed to the Derrick Flats annexation and the paper's support of that annexation, were you not?
I don't know what you're talking about.
The all-service company, owning over 80% of the Derrick Flats slum property, and among other things, operating rental offices, Rubbish and Garbage Collection Services. All Service Company, DF Industrial Corporation, Enterprises Limited, Mr. Boyd Allison, and a total net profit of better than $5 million a year.
When Hamilton objects to how Perry's handling his own witness, Perry does the obvious thing. He calls another witness. What? The judge is cool with that. And Hamilton, surprisingly, has no objections. Tilden Stewart, problematically, was financially invested in that whole annexation biz. Bust him.
You purchased 5,000 shares of stock in that corporation. You also purchased an option for an additional 5,000 shares at $150,000. You might have become a millionaire overnight if the city bought that land for a marina. Now, you liquidated all your assets to buy that first block of stock. Where, Mr. Stewart, were you going to get the money for the second block of stock?
Please, Mr. Mason, I knew Carrie Warden. I knew her greed, and we made a deal. I would set her up as Adam's heir through Prentice York. And then we would split the money from the sale of the newspaper. There was an argument. I picked up the poker and I couldn't let her sell to Allison. I couldn't let her tell people about me. I needed time.
One wonders, how did the sling-armed Tilden Stewart manage to carry Prentice York 2 miles inland? Was the arm fake? Wouldn't the doctors have noticed that? We don't get that answer in the denouement. Instead, we get Miriam reporting that the newspaper is going to be A-OK.
Our advertising's doubled. Our circulation's gone into orbit. We have enough contracts to pay that loan off twice.
And Joe asks the question that's on everyone's mind. His mom has the answer.
The girl positively amazes me. This never-ending enthusiasm. What am I going to do with her?
I have a feeling you'll think of something.
Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. Adela is a deep dive on an actor or actress who guest starred in the episode. And finally, a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. The Paul for this episode. The newspaper at the center of the case of the jealous journalist is, of course, fictitious. The 3 big dailies in 1961 were the LA Times, the LA Herald, which incidentally merged with the LA Examiner in 1962, and the LA Daily News. So here's my question for y'all. Do some digging. Is there anything in the LA newspaper world that rhymes with the plot points of the case of the jealous journalist? Are there familial crack-ups regarding inheritance, lower circulation numbers, key political issues like annexation that would have gotten the paper in hot water? Tell us what you find, Pauls. Our Della for this episode is actually Della's. It's a twofer. Why? Because we get rare on-screen appearances by 2 people we won't see again. I wanted to take the opportunity to highlight both of them. First up, longtime Hollywood stuntman Dick Geary. And everybody says on the count of 3, who? He's one of the men who finds Tilden Stewart early in the episode.
Mr. Stewart, where are the others? Where's Adam York? Where's his brother?
Here are some facts about Dick. Number 1, born Richard Geary, 1925, to stuntman Bud Geary and Edgerita Williams. Bud made cash through doubling and stunt acting in the 30s and 40s. Number 2, like his dad, Dick had a handful of on-screen film credits. A bit part in this Perry Mason episode was one of them. Number 3, famous for being a double for Robert Vaughn. Number 4, co-founded the Stuntman's Association in 1961 with Lauren Janes, a stunt double for Steve McQueen. And number 5, he died in 2000 in Encino. Richard Geary, we hardly knew ye. Our other Della, Claire Griswold, a.k.a. the treacherous looking out for number 1, Carrie Warden.
I'm afraid my arithmetic is a little better than yours.
Here's 5 about Claire. Number 1, daughter of Lieutenant General Francis Griswold. Claire was born in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1936. Told a TV magazine, quote, Dad was with the Air Force. We moved once about every 18 months. The family lived all over the world, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, Europe. Claire notes, quote, London was the best because I was able to study ballet at the Sadler Wells School for 2.5 years, end quote. Number 2, took acting classes at New York's Neighborhood Playhouse School of the Theater, created by Sanford Meisner. Robert Duvall, a future TV co-star, and other Hollywood legends studied at the Playhouse. But she found more than a love for acting there. She found her future husband, aspiring actor and director Sidney Pollack. You know him best as the director of 3 Days of the Condor, Tootsie, Out of Africa, The Firm. He directed all of them. They got married in 1958 and moved to Southern California. Number 3, Claire appeared in Wanted Dead or Alive, and in 1961 was one of the most prolific guest stars on TV. 9 different shows that year. Hawaiian Eye, Surfside 6, and of course, Perry Mason. Number 4, Alfred Hitchcock actually considered her for the lead in Marnie, along with Tippi Hedren, of course, who got the role. Both of them were under personal contract to him. Even though she and Hedren were in competition for the same role, there was no tension between the two of them since they were friends from their early modeling days in New York. After watching the screen test, Hitchcock decided Griswold wasn't the right person and chose Hedren. By the end of 1963, Griswold had retired from acting to be a full-time mom. Number 5, mother of Rachel Pollack, mother of Rebecca Pollack, mother of Stephen Pollack. Stephen died tragically in a plane crash in 1993. Griswold died on March 28th, 2011, in West Hollywood, California. Our Perry for this episode involves the background of Perry's favorite newspaper. Anytime you see headlines regarding Perry in an earlier episode in this show, it's on the pages of the Los Angeles Chronicle. And now we know that's an Adam York-owned outfit, and apparently Perry's got ins with the principal parties. That's why he's the one executing the will. This is one of my favorite lines in the entire series. It comes from a newspaper headline. It's season 1's The Case of the Sunbather's Diary.
I don't like it, Perry.
Oh, I'm afraid the photographer didn't capture the real me.
And on that note, let's talk themes. While jealousy gets the nod in the title because it's alliterative with journalist, it's not really a great adjective for the episode. Joe is jealous of Ralph because he's engaged to Carrie for approximately 2 shots at the bar, and then we're done. Nope, the theme of this episode is greed, plain and simple. Boyd Allison, no principles, only greed. Tilden Stewart, no principles, only greed. Carrie Warden, no principles, only greed. Just a question, though. Joe says that Adam always distrusted Boyd. Great. But where did Tilden Stewart's dishonesty come from? And why was Joe so close to getting married to Carrie Warden when she knows Joe's side wouldn't always have the most butter on the bread? If Carrie Warden is that cynical, that treacherous, she deserves Boyd Allison. Yet we're not supposed to think that they were lovers. How could she handle the myopic and crusading Joe in the first place, especially when it looks like he's headed for a crash landing, financially speaking? The Case of the Naive Newspaper Man. Now there's a title. It's time to get to a Perry proverb. Let us go, shall we? Our man wants speed. You think you're getting him work on the quick, something that should take an hour, and you've got it done in 15 minutes. Here's how Perry responds.
Prepare a power of attorney for Joseph Davies, naming me his proxy to vote his shares. I want you to get his signature on it later.
I'll have it ready in 15 minutes.
Oh, Della.
Yes, Barry.
The wire about the meeting tonight, send a copy of it to the district attorney.
The Hamilton Burger?
Mm-hmm. And please, make it 5 minutes, not 15.
On that account, Perry would have fired me as secretary a long time ago. I'll get you a podcast in 2 weeks, Perry. Make it 12 hours, whippersnapper. Your father and Aunt Mai are waiting. Aye, aye, Perry. Now let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
There is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Each time we visit the water cooler, we give you deleted scenes, clips that didn't quite make the episode's final cut. Longtime listener Tim Cree writes in with this one. It's a montage of the many fiancés of Carrie Warden. She's engaged to our defendant Joe, then engaged to his rival Ralph. But wait, then she's engaged to Denver Pyle, then she's engaged to Paul, and then Perry, and then Paul again. Tom Wiltshire wrote in with this one. In court, when Perry goes into full show and tell mode, he flashes pictures of Carrie Warden's apartment, showing the phone off the hook. Later, he shows pics of dead Prentice York's boots and hands. Then shows the pics taken by Paul's operative of pinup clerk Bonnie Mae in order to tell if the witness can correctly identify Carrie Warden. Then shows the bartender pics of Paul eating a sub sandwich and asks the bartender if he recognizes this man. Again, to test the bartender's ability, he asks him if he can identify Joe, but shows him a picture of Ralph Quentin. Good stuff, Tim and Tom. Mine involves a nice continuity error early in the episode when Paul breaks into that will reading sequence and says, "Excuse me, Perry."
Excuse me, Perry.
Then we cut to Paul walking up to Perry's desk with a big glaring problem. He's wearing a different sports coat and tie than he was just a second ago. In the deleted scene, Paul's sports coat and tie keep shifting throughout the entire episode, as do the accoutrement of his crack team of investigators. Cut back, costume change, and we're in a continuity free fall. Our Paul from the Case of the Lethal Lesson involved tech-savvy law schools. You'll remember that Perry Mason's Denver School of Law, the McLaren School of Law, featured a high-tech, for-the-time moot courtroom. We asked, what other law schools offer high-tech equipment to their students? Well, it should come as no surprise that the Stanford Law School, located in the heart of Silicon Valley, has a program connected with technology and offers access to cutting technological tools for all its students. You can also find a pretty interesting article from last year talking about Yale Law School students strapping on VR headsets as part of their legal training. Just to note, if you're a lawyer and want to get in some high-tech practice, there are companies that will sell you VR training so you can practice your presentation skills from the comfort of your own home. As for the analog video cassettes, and a wormy tech producer who's behind a panopticonic screen, that's just made for TV movie hokum. Now it's time for a listener letter. Unofficial legal counsel for the pod, Tom Wiltshire wrote in with some more info on that pesky plane from the Case of the Guilty Clients. Quote, the FAA does not issue service ceilings. They do approve operating manuals based on designed and tested service ceilings that are promulgated by the manufacturer. The plane in the show that Bronson designed is actually a Cessna Model 310. It's a propeller-driven light twin, not a jet. The first 310 flew in 1953. The definition of service ceiling is the height above sea level at which an aircraft with normal rated load is unable to climb faster than 100 feet per minute under standard air conditions. The Cessna 310 has a 20,000 MSL service ceiling. A service ceiling, not really an absolute limit on the altitude that a particular design can achieve, but one at which the aircraft begins to run out of climb capability. As for modular flow in aeronautics, I have a private pilot license. I've never heard of it. The phrase might be referring to airflow over wind tunnel test models, but when laminar flow is broken, the wing stalls. It describes the action of air passing smoothly over the top of a wing in non-turbulent fashion. When laminar flow is broken, the wing stalls. And as for the TV nonsense, the Cessna 310 is not a pressurized cabin, so Ryder would have had to have been on oxygen since pilots are required to use oxygen above 12,500 feet MSL. Ryder would have likely disintegrated at the 400 plus knots he was announcing in his dive. Additionally, Ryder would have been physically incapable of opening the cabin door to bail out. Close quote. I love that stuff. Thanks so much, Tom. As always, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have a comment on the episode or the pod in general? Drop me a line at theperrypod@gmail.com. In our next episode, Wesley Lau comes a calling, but he's not Lieutenant Anderson. Can't wait to find out what the twist is. You'll have to. It's the case of the impatient partner. See what I did there? Join us, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat.